we do have Moorehouse, who is a successful co-founder of EarthTech, which is an impact investing organization. And it is the fastest growing asset class in investment right now. So it's important to get on board. Adam Long, who is the ethical CEO and has some incredible companies in his portfolio, knows a lot about growth. You were Chief Growth Officer at Humanitix, as well as the co-founder of Conscious Step. Again, the impact part is so important. So you have a lot of knowledge to impart in terms of communicating that impact in a really meaningful way for consumers, customers in the market, as well as investors. And Franziska, Iseli, who's not only just a new mum, but also one of our top-rated rockstar mentors and imparting your incredible knowledge as well. So Franziska is an absolute marketing gun, founder of Basic Bananas, and also your swimwear and activewear label, which is...
Yeah, Ocean Lovers, yeah.
Ocean Lovers, which is all about impacting positively our oceans.
My main point today will be on communicating impact. So I'll do a little bit on creating, and then some thoughts around that, and then mainly on communicating. These are some of the brands that we have built that are our own. We also have, through the branding agency here, the Business Hood, we obviously build a lot of different companies, some that are creating impact and some that are not. My passion is always in working with and creating companies that do have some sort of an impact. Now, when it comes to creating impact, one of the frameworks that I like to use, and I see Ant is using this as his background too. So when we work with any type of business and they're like thinking, oh, how can I make some sort of an impact, and how would this work for my business, and they have maybe no idea where to start, often I just go to send them to this site. Are you familiar with the UN SDGs? You probably are. What I'm going to do is just talk you through a few different examples, and then maybe Ant and Adam can add to them. One is, this is an initiative. I don't know if you guys have heard of Entrepreneurs Organization. It's a global organization. Highly recommend the organization. I'm on the board of the Sydney chapter. And again, as part of what I do anywhere, I always want to see how can we make an impact. So with Entrepreneurs Organization has members that are all around the world that you have to qualify by having a revenue of over $1 million in US dollars. And so a lot of the guys that are in the organization are sorry, no offense, and just a statement, are white middle-aged men. Now, on the board also, there are hardly any women. On the board also, again, similar story. Unfortunately, a lot of these guys don't give a fuck about this stuff. So I thought, okay, how can we make them care? Because it's a powerful organization. These guys make money, they run successful businesses, but they just don't care that much yet. So we just took one of these goals here. And this one, because this is an initiative that I started in Sydney, which is now going global. I took the number 14 here, Life Below Water. And you can see here in the design, this is just my girls whipped this up. They just, had the 14, how many goals is it again? 17 goals. And then they made the 14 a bit bigger. So this is just an initiative to help entrepreneurs clean up our beaches. So just using this framework. When it comes to creating an impact in a business, I have found that there are sort of 3 ways to go about it. Either it's in the business model, which is your model, Maheen, or in the business practices, which is also you're also doing, and it's through collaboration and donation. So I'll just quickly talk through a few of the different ones here fitting into one of these categories. You guys all know Tom's. These two have sustainability and impact in the business model. So Tom's, that Tom's shoes is 1 for 1. You buy one pair goes to kids in South America, I believe, that don't have shoes. Who gives a crap? Massive, amazing Australian case study here. Again, they have sustainability in their business model. They actually use one of the UN SDGs here about sanitation. This is another brand that we have built. They are an intelligence company, and they also have impact in their business model. So these are 3 guys, ex-army, some fancy army, I forgot which, the highest, whatever, the guys that go to Afghanistan and stuff. These 3 guys from Australia built this company, and they're using intelligence to end modern day slavery. So they have it also in their mission and in their business model. Again, this is a local business that we have helped to create in Melbourne. they again thought about, okay, how can we make impact part of the business model? And they make picture frames made from recycled timbers. So it's again the circular economy here that they're using. This is our own example here. For us, we have different companies. For Ocean Lovers here, Ocean Lovers is impact in terms of a business model. Basic Bananas is our marketing education organization. It's not in the business model, it's in the business practices. So the model itself is not about impact, other than impacting business owners. It doesn't really count that much, but it's in the business practices. So for example, these are some of our initiatives that we have, which is, plastic-free days and beach cleanups. And then also I mentioned here, number 3 is donating and collaboration. We collaborate with a few different organizations around the world to support, for example, for kids to go to school and things like that. And that's the one thing also, I'm sure, Mahin, you probably are just also building your website coming up, as now that you've got everything registered. When you do build also a website, it's quite important also to mention those impact initiatives that you're involved in, not just the work that you do, but maybe you also support other things or educational things that you do, and just make sure you do have that also on your website. Now, communicating impact real quick. There are 2 ways to communicate that we need to, as a company, always think about. One is internally. So we need to communicate impact internally and externally. Now, internally, there are 2 things to think about. One here, this is something I'm obsessed about at the moment in our branding agency. Internally is to have, and as you grow your team, you will, start working on this, is to have some sort of a culture book and making impact a part of your team as you grow your team. And this is just an example of our own culture book, but it's really important, I find now, for companies, and this is sort of, impact or no impact, but whether, it's really important for businesses to look for ways to make their culture better. And you can make your culture better also by making impact a part of it. And the reason why this is so important is because, especially in Australia, there's a little bit of a shortage on talent because our borders have been closed for so long. And so companies are really struggling to find the best talent. The people will go to the company that has the best culture, other than getting obviously paid a fair amount, the fair salary, etc. So making a culture book and creating impact as part of your culture. The second thing I have found really useful internally in terms of impact is nominate an impact ambassador or a chief impact officer, or whatever the role is that you want to call in your own business. I just picked one of my girls and basically just asked who would love to be the impact ambassador. And Aga is the one that put her hand up. And so she's in charge of making sort of, policing us a little bit in terms of, are we using too many plastics? Are we at least cleaning up a local beach once a quarter? Are we sustainable in terms of energy? Sometimes, she would walk in and the heater is on. It's like, who left the heater on from the last day? That's super not efficient in terms of energy. And then external communication, what I suggest you do is there's something called the customer journey. And what I suggest you do is, as you grow the company, just figure out in terms of investors, but also customers, because without customers, clients, for you, the councils, you won't get investors. So I would look at all the touch points that your business has with anyone that you're in touch with, whether that is the investors or the councils, the people that work in councils, or customers. So that could be obviously your website, maybe your social channels, your pitch deck, maybe your email signatures, maybe your phone messaging, answering machine. So figure out what are all these touch points on this customer journey, and then align them. Make sure that you communicate your impact, because your business is so all about impact, across each touch point. So every touch point is aligned, and every touch point talks about your mission somehow in a small way. Here's a quick example of that. So this is one of our brands that Colette mentioned, Ocean Lovers. And here again, we made sure that every touch point that we have is talking about the impact. And also our mission here at Ocean Lovers is to raise awareness for ocean causes. So making people more aware of the issues that we have with ocean and to make us better citizens when it comes to ocean conservation. So one of our touch points, these are the surf suits that we make from recycled plastics. And so one touch point is when people get this in the mail is the clothing tag label. So our agency here, Julia, came up with this bag tag. On the outside, it says, next time you go to the beach, can you please pick up some rubbish? You would be amazing if you did that. And then inside it has a decompostable bag that comes ready for them to take to the beach. It's just, again, a message, a little embedded message for them to remember, hey, next time you go to the beach, yeah, thanks, Adam, to make sure that you are a good citizen. So you can communicate your impact across any touch point. You can be quite clever about it. And just two more examples here. This is another one, Charlie Eco. Their mission is to save the world through sustainable gifts, something along those lines. So they just they collaborate with companies that are sustainable and ethical, and then you can buy them on one website, Charlie Eco. And again, every touch point is aligned. It's beautiful. It makes sense. Just a quick personal brand here. This is a friend of mine that we built her brand, but she's all about impact. And again, through her photography, it just shows you that, this is a global woman that is making an impact and seems to have a big heart. And then one last quick thing about the future. I heard someone say the other day, I don't remember who it was, but it was someone in the space of raising funds. And they said that in the future, not now, but in the future, people, investors, customers, suppliers, manufacturers, whoever we work with, councils, will pick mainly companies that are BCorp certified or probably a similar certification, but this is taking off quite big now. The BCorp, are you familiar with BCorp? You probably are, yeah. So someone told me that in the future, it will be more likely that probably councils and different shareholders will only work with companies that are BCorp certified. So it's really a good thing to look into already now to get some of the policies in place for your business. So that's it. And then, of course, if you have any questions.
All righty. So yeah, impact. Well, firstly, let's start with what the hell it is. And so this is it's basically a marked effect or influence. So our regional measures have had a significant impact on unemployment. It's a weird term, and it's a term that's really just filtering into kind of human consciousness. The traditional custodians of impact are the not-for-profit sector. When we think about the Red Cross and we think about World Wildlife Fund, et cetera, they're impact organizations. Only in the last 10 years, really 5 years, really 2 years, has impact ventures or impact for-profit organizations kind of really come to the fore. And so now we're really seeing this coming together of these two worlds. And that's what we're all about at EarthTech, funding and getting funding for organizations that are using capitalism as a mechanism, but not a purpose. That the purpose is bigger than the fuel and bigger than the mechanism. And so ultimately the purpose for an impact orientated organization, at least like a pure one, one that's really focused on impact as a primary mechanism, the widget that they develop, software, hardware, services, whatever the case, is the mechanism through which the marked effect or influence is generated. And it's a particularly cool time in human history where we've got the not-for-profit sector and hardcore capital markets, hardcore capitalists coming together, and really sort of humanitarians coming together with technologists to help make the world a better place, scaling up with seed rounds and A rounds and all the other venture capital kind of terms. And so all of this stuff is really sped up through COVID. And like Franziska was saying, the Sustainable Development Goals are really cool because they create a collective operating language through which the layperson and everybody else can understand impact. And so, if you go to anyone in the community and say, hey, what do you think of these 17 things? If the Earth and if humanity had ticked all of these boxes, well, we'd be in a pretty good spot. And so what I think the SDGs is a purpose for humanity. And then underpinning that, there's 17 things that individuals and organizations can link into. And then underneath the 17 SDGs are 169 targets that provide a way for us to measure what we're doing, and what we measure, we can manage. So I guess, why impact first and foremost? First, I think we live in this particular time in history where all stakeholders get that doing the right thing is equally important, more important than making a dollar. I'm kind of in my mid-40s, all through my businessy entrepreneurial stuff, boards of directors, education. No one ever talked about sustainability. It was just top line growth, bottom, getting costs down, and bottom line growth. That's all we ever talked about. And it's a very soulless experience. It's a soulless experience for the customer. It's a soulless experience for employees. And quite frankly, it's a soulless experience for the entrepreneurs after you get it to a certain point, and the adrenaline of trying to get something off the ground fades away. Then you're just running a business. And if you don't have a purpose above and beyond just generating bottom line, then it kind of gets boring. I chose this background on purpose. I don't always use this. In fact, I never have before. But my point is that, like, the SDGs, or just impact language generally, is a signaling tool. And I'm not a marketing expert, but they're super powerful. And I see that you've used those on the first page of your slide, which is helping rally your tribe to you. It helps to create, some values alignment, which is just so important now, particularly with the young consumer. For example, we're doing a bunch of work with some entrepreneurs out of the fashion industry at the moment, particularly out of the UK, and they're being pushed heavily by the fast fashion industry, who are desperate to turn their mode of operation into a sustainable mode, because their 14-year-old customers are demanding it. So if you're in impact, you're on the right side of history, not just for humanity and what our grandchildren think about us, but for the consumer that's sort of buying, or the shareholder that's investing, et cetera, et cetera. I've already spoken about this, what gets measured gets managed. So it's great to be talking about impact. It's great to be talking about the extent of the problem, but unless you can measure your impact, and that's obviously, core to what you're doing, then in some respects it's for naught. And as the industry, as all stakeholders, get more educated in impact, and we are starting at a real base level at the moment, but as we get more and more educated in it, we'll start to call bullshit on things that are saying one thing and doing another, or having, big lofty ambitions because it's good for whatever marketing or getting people's attention, but don't have a way to measure that going forward. So I'll touch on that in the next few slides. And then, I've really touched on this last point, right? It's in and it's not going away. And the role of technology and the role of entrepreneurs in this, and this is a personal opinion only, is that most of humanity are kind of really jumping on board this at the moment, sped up by COVID, and seeing the results of climate change is more than just a scientific hypothesis. But in order for humans to truly adapt, we're not very good at going backwards, and we're not very good at compromising and suffering. And so when we're thinking about trying to get like mass adoption for recycling, for example, there's an enormous role for technology and design and branding and better business practices, because we use the 3 C's. So in order to create change, in order for someone to move from doing something to doing something else, there can't be a lot of pain. In fact, the solution that we're moving to has to be cheaper, it has to be cool, and it has to be convenient. And that, I think, is the core role of entrepreneurship and technology, because entrepreneurs are amazing at solving a customer's problems. And a big part of what a customer problem is now is that they kind of like the idea of, for example, recycling better, but they kind of can't be bothered. And so by providing that solution that helps to make it cheaper, cooler, and more convenient, we're doing our part to take humanity on a journey. And so when we think about like, well, how the hell are we going to model the impact that we want to have, and how are we going to measure it? There's 2 tools that are fairly commonly used and accepted now, particularly if you're talking to like impact investors, the fastest growing asset class in the world. One is the theory of change, and the other is called an impact assessment model from the impact management project. And I'll make this available, so don't like dive into the detail, just look at the big picture of this. So basically the theory of change is like, what's the problem you're trying to solve, but only about the impact. When we're trying to solve a problem for our customer as an entrepreneur, it's a bunch of different things. But when we're thinking about the impact, it's only focused on, the specific impact. It could be equality or education, or in this case, probably circular economy would be the one that you could really, really dial into. Who's your audience? How are you going to get to them? What steps do you need to bring about the change? There's a lot of kind of change management process in this language. How are you going to measure it? What's the effect? And then with impact, there's always two types. There's direct and indirect. And it's really important to understand that they kind of go hand in glove, but they are different. So the direct impact is your immediate customer, the person who benefits from, let's say it's a health solution. That's always often the easiest to understand. So if a doctor is giving CPR to somebody who's just had a heart attack and they save their life, well, they've just saved one life. The direct impact of that intervention is one life. But that person has a family, and maybe they're an educator, or maybe, they have another contribution to society. And so that person doing CPR saved one life, one direct impact, but potentially positively benefited, like whatever needs to be measured, hard to measure, but 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people. And so in many respects, like some solutions are very high direct impact, low indirect, others are vice versa, but both really powerful to understand. And then what particularly like investors or not-for-profits or real impact professionals are looking for are the assumptions that underpin all of these elements. And then this impact assessment model, the way to kind of think about this is it's almost like a bang for buck. It's like for every dollar in, how much impact am I getting on the way out? So, what is the impact? What's the gadget? Who's it for? How much is it going to cost? What's the contribution? And I just forgot that last one. I can't see it because all of your faces are crossing it. And what's the risk to the overall thing? And risk is really, really important in impact. Really, really important, because our intended actions can have negative counteractions. And so weighing up the risks to that are super important. I can't quite think of any in your context, but there definitely will be some. And so addressing what they could be and how you're going to mitigate them is super important. And so what that enables you to do is have a really confident statement of intent that is ideally bulletproof at the right level of detail that you're after, depending on your audience. And so for EarthTech, what we're saying here is that we're solely focused on SDG 17, specifically SDG 17.3 and 17.6. And if you'd like to talk about each of those for 30 seconds, I can do that. And if you'd like to talk to each of those for 3 hours, I would love to do that. And then it's, we're signaling that we use the IMP, we're signaling that we use the theory of change, we're signaling, that we sort of really know what we're talking about above and beyond just the high level 17. And if I can offer, I guess, one, this is a very direct one to you, Marianne, but by the more SDGs you've got, it's one of two things. Either you're going to have a very complex theory of change and very complex IMP, or you've just created a fruit salad that you don't necessarily mean to do. And so with a solution like yours, the way that I would articulate it is that we are laser focused on SDG 12, target 12.3. I'm plucking, but we have an indirect benefit on these other ones. And so we're just sort of separating, we're making one very important, so that's the one that you're going to primarily measure, and then others that you have a flow-on effect for, if that makes sense. And then once you've kind of picked yours, so let's say it's SDG 12 as a primary one, Then you look on the targets, the SDG targets that sit below that. This is our version, right? So we're signaling a few things here. One, that we touch on multiple of them, but we're also calling out very specifically that we're not going anywhere near policy and anywhere near institutional coherence, because that's not what we're about. We're kind of all about the other stuff, which is more about action and technology and money. And, you know, if you can see what we've kind of done here, like the first slide and the final slide, again, it's signaling. We're signaling to the global goals. And then this is my vision statement. And this is the heart of like how my impact, how EarthTech's impact will be measured. And so it almost becomes like the footer of the core aspects of our slides. And while I kind of want you guys to look at the title, Founders Institute Mentor Presentation Impact, but as a secondary thing, and Franziska went through this a lot, you know, let people know what your mission is, what's your big, hairy, audacious goal. And the cool thing about being a legitimate impact organization is that you can put down a big, hairy, audacious goal that really, really matters and is really going to move people. Whereas for non-impact organizations, they all have vision statements, mission statements, BHAGs, whatever, but often it doesn't take long to scratch below the surface and see that really that's just marketing spin for make a fuckload of money and get to unicorn status as quickly as we can. And so in this environment that we're in, being really proud about the impact that you're aiming to have on the world and how your solution is going to do that, how your business model is going to do that, how your revenue, how your stakeholder engagement is going to do that, it's the best way to win the war on talent. And so I think, you know, whether it's doing great work in the world, whether it's motivating a team, whether it's getting on board a tribe of customers and other stakeholders, being really clear about the impact that you want to have on the world is just so critical. I do have one final point, which is a warning. The problem with impact at the moment is that because so few people understand it, as soon as you start talking about it, people assume you're a not-for-profit. And I've suffered this a lot. So because we're so far out there in the impact space, unless we really dial up the capitalism language quite early, particularly if we're talking, you know, to investors, then we get put in the not-for-profit pile. And so I just, you know, really flag that to make sure that the bigger the impact mission, the more hardcore your revenue model, business model kind of stuff has to be in your articulation so that you're not put in the not-for-profit bucket unless you want to do that, which is totally fine. But making sure that wherever you sit on the continuum is well understood early on, particularly if you're talking to investors, is really important. That one's been a hard-fought lesson for me.
Absolutely right. Like having worked in not-for-profit for a long time, it was always like, oh, well, if you do good, you're in that realm. It's not something that, you know, the capitalistic model chases. But, you know, I really encourage everyone, like, be unapologetic about chasing revenue and chasing, you know, capital and bigger funds, because then you can actually further your impact. And that's why it's such an exciting time that this is, you know, being for purpose attracts more investment, more customers, and importantly, like you touched on there, and it attracts the right kind of talent and staff. You know, I read something recently about Gen Z. They are flocking to climate action jobs. They don't really want to bother with anything else.
Let's chat strategy. Who's excited about talking about strategy? Woo, yeah, I am. Yeah, me too. Great. All right. We're all in exactly the right place here. So this comes from some hard-won lessons with companies like these. These are the ones I've started. Beehive you've never heard of because it was an absolute disaster. Conscious Step, that's the socks that support different causes. Oh, there's a bit of green screen issue there. Matt Damon is a fan of the Conscious Step socks, as you can see there. It's good when Matt Damon, Al Gore, and Jane Goodall and other cool people like that get to wear your socks. It's always nice. Smarter Drafter is software, turning lawyers into robots. Although some would say there are already robots and no one even noticed, but that's software that's now used by a few hundred law firms around Australia. I did a stint for a while with Humanitix, which is a charity. It's the only charity on this list as a chief growth officer, turning them from a basically garage startup into the fastest growing ticketing platform in Australia, New Zealand, and now the US. And the ethical CEO, that's what I do when I'm helping other cool companies figure out their impact, figure out their strategy as well. So that's where these come from. There's a couple of things I've learned over the years, and I wonder if you've managed to come across them too. So for all of us on the screen, you can give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. True or false? Investors don't care about your impact, just the bottom line. Is that true or false? Ooh. So go on, Mahim. Place your vote. Do they care? Do they care? There's a lot of uncertainty around this, actually, which you've just articulated really well with your facial expression there. So thank you for that. So the fact is there's more money around for impact investing than ever before. And it's interesting to understand why that is. Superannuation is a really boring topic. And as a result, it's really hard for superannuation companies to get somebody to switch their superannuation from one company to their company. But they did discover that there's a small group of people who would switch their superannuation, and that were those who were switching to another company to go and join an ethical or a sustainable fund. What that meant is the entire industry started putting billions of dollars towards these ethical funds because that was the only movement in the market. That was their only opportunity for marketing leverage. Now, superannuation companies have these big pools of money. They subdivide it, and some of it goes into various resources. Some end up in the hands of venture capital companies. So venture capital companies have picked up this money from superannuation companies with this imperative to go and spend it on something ethical so they can report to their superannuation companies that their fund is doing something good. That's why venture capitalists are actually paying attention to this more so today than they ever have before, because suddenly there's a big pool of money for them. But we do have to remember that venture capitalists are called venture capitalists, not social impact investors, for a reason. And that's because once they've ticked that box that you're doing something ethical, you're going to be facing all the same questions that any other business is going to face. So if you're going to go to anyone and start talking about your impact, we want to understand what your model is up front and where the incentives are in your business. So essentially, there's three models that I'm seeing coming up pretty regularly. The first one is the implicit model, where what you do every day has a direct impact. So Mahin, you're a good example of this. In fact, you're not that different from the example I've got here, which is Green Collect down in Melbourne, who do recycling and sustainability services, where anything they do, because Green Collect collects any bit of rubbish, trash, furniture, DVDs, cassette tapes, mercury from X-ray machines, you name it, they will take it back. As long as they keep doing what they're doing, there's a positive impact there. And it's pretty simple to understand. Then you've got those where the impact is actually a cost of goods sold, which is an accounting term, which just means anytime that there's a sale, there's an allocation towards something funding. And that's conscious steps. So that's how we do it with the socks. Anytime a sock is produced, we allocate a donation to our partners. So what that enables us to do is when we say, hey, these are socks that protect toucans, or we sell a pair of socks that says this plant 10 trees for every pair, those 10 trees get planted, whether we sell that product at full price, half price, give it away at a festival for free, that donation always happens. So that's about building into our model the impact. So it will always happen for every unit produced. Now, how is that different? Well, most people are familiar with this one, which is the profit share model, which is when you look at the end of the day, once you've spent everything, you've paid for all your expenses, brought in all your money, what's left over, then some of that goes to some impact or charitable cause. So Thank You does it that way. Who Gives a Crap also does it that way, sharing 50% of their profit. So why do I talk about incentives in this model? When you look across these three models, you imagine there's a founding team behind them, and these are beautiful people. They're passionate, they're excited, they make things happen. Maybe down the track, they raise a little bit of investment like Conscious Step did, or Tom's Shoes did, for example. Maybe it's 20 years later, the founding team is no longer around, and people are trying to make a decision about what are they going to do with the money this year. When you have the choice between paying the founders more or doing more of your impact, there's an adverse incentive there. As opposed to when your impact is part of your cost of goods sold, where doing more of what makes you a profit actually ends up making more impact, or when it's implicit for you as well, where just doing what you do is going to have a good impact. So there's a question to ask yourself about how do you lock your mission and your impact in long term, so that not just you, but down the track, when you hand it over to another management team or investors have come on board, that you're able to make sure that your mission happens regardless of what the incentives or pressure might be in any given moment. This is a topic I could nerd out about for 3 hours on. Anthony, I know you want to go deep on the goals, but hey, let's talk about how accounting models affects behavior. That turns out into some really interesting things. All right, next, true or false? True or false? Customers forgive a crappy experience if you have impact in your business model. We're giving thumbs up, true or false? What do we reckon? I'm seeing a couple of falses there. Oh, Franziska is giving it, yeah, there's some forgiveness there. Anthony, your video is frozen or you're deep in thought, I can't tell. So I'd actually go with false. And that could make for a really interesting debate after Franziska. Will they forgive a crappy experience if you have impact? Not really. And there's been a whole generation of social entrepreneurs who came through where they took something that already exists. Maybe they were selling candles. You guys need some candles tonight. Maybe they've got a food product. Maybe they're doing banking. They take something and they add some impact to that model, but the thing ends up more expensive. Or because of their impact, they've got less money for customer service, for shipping, for all the things that make a business run well. And so the customer has a crappier experience. And so what I challenge you to do is to not ever let your impact be an excuse for a crappy customer experience. If you can make it better, make it better. And so at Humanitix, that was actually one of the core philosophies and the core tenets of what's made them so successful. Humanitix went out with a ticketing platform. And unlike Eventbrite, whose profits then go to Silicon Valley shareholders, all the profits that are made at Humanitix end up going to these education programs around the world. So there's the two founders, Josh Ross and Adam McCurdy there. Now, they realized they had a big challenge ahead of them. They were going to have to approach event organizers all around the world and convince them to switch from Eventbrite, from Ticketmaster, from all sorts of software that's already out there, and get them to come across to this new startup. Now, if you're a marketing manager with a bank and you're running a conference with $1 million budget, you're not going to risk $1 million budget using some software that you think might fail, might not work, might lead to less sales just because it has an impact. There's a benchmark, there's a baseline that you have to hit with your service, and having impact doesn't excuse you from what you do. So as a minimum, this is a Humanitix philosophy: be as good or better than what is out there already, and it's got to be at the same price or better than whatever is already out there. The only exception to that is luxury goods, but that's a different pricing dynamic and a story for another day. All right, one more, true or false. It's essential to educate the market on your cause. I hear this one a lot. We just need to educate all our customers on what we do. True or false? It's essential to educate the market on our cause. We've got a true from a him. Oh, I'm seeing a lot of truths. I say this one is false. It is not essential. And in fact, sometimes your cause can actually get in the way of what you're trying to do. So I'll use an example that's good for you, Mahima, because I've been working with Green Collect in Melbourne lately. Now, Green Collect have a team of people who are passionate about waste. They obsess over waste. They will take any object, any item, they will find a way to reclaim it or resell it. So actually a big source of income for them is reselling items that they've collected through their various waste streams, like furniture that they've collected from offices or bank branches as one of their core models there. Now, if you're going to go to a family, a homeowner, another business who's looking to buy furniture, and you tell them we take any crap anywhere in the world, ooh, that's kind of getting in the way of what they're looking for, which is actually something that's really carefully curated, good quality stuff that shouldn't be thrown away because it is valuable, because it's good. So it's not always essential to educate the market on your cause. What we need to do is get into our market's head and say, well, what do they actually need to hear in this moment? Which brings us to, how do we actually communicate this stuff? Now, when people sit down to do communicating their impact or really just marketing or sales in general, there's usually a conversation that goes like this. Now, what I'm going to put on screen, this is what not to do, but it might feel a little bit familiar, right? Usually we start off with a meeting. We say, you know what, let's put our impact on our packaging. Let's go and run a podcast. Let's go and do a speaker series. Let's get a billboard. Let's post on social media. Let's start a blog. It usually starts with the medium. That's where the ideation starts. And then someone says, great, we're doing blogs. What are we going to write about? What's the message here? What are we talking? Who are we inviting on our podcast series? What do we write on our packaging? What's the message here? And then somebody usually says, oh, but who's actually watching this? Who's actually listening to the podcast? Who's turning up on social media? Who's going to drive past this billboard? And then finally someone says, actually, that sounds like a lot of time and effort. What kind of results are we going to get from this? Now, this probably feels familiar because chances are you've sat in a conversation exactly like this, where someone said, I've got a great idea for marketing and sales. We're doing podcasts. And the conversation flows through. So what's wrong with this picture? Seems pretty obvious when we see it mapped out like this. It's actually just entirely the wrong way around. Until we know what result we're actually trying to achieve, which audience we need to reach to get that result, we can't figure out what message we need to share and what channel, what medium we need to use to put it out there. And this is why I say it's not always essential to communicate your impact to your audience. It's not always going to be the number one thing that you say in a sales conversation, and sometimes it can get in the way of that. So let's go through how we actually approach it. First thing we need to start with is the result. I mean, if we look at your business as an example, we know you're going to go out and speak to councils all around Australia. Well, you're not going to speak to councils. You're actually going to speak to some humans that work at councils. Councils don't exist. What is a council? I don't know. That's a made-up organization of people. But you will speak to people, certain people whose responsibility it is to look after waste streams, certain people who have been hired with a KPI of introducing new initiatives with sustainability. And actually, what we're looking to do is help them be successful in their goals, not to sell to a council. So the question is, which people there are we actually going to try to reach, and what result are they after? That's what we ultimately need to lean into. When it comes into marketing or sales, it's not necessarily what we want to say, it's what they need to hear to get their job done. So if we've got a good idea of what result we're after, and I'll just say one more thing about that actually. In the early stages of a business, the result can often be a really small, tangible financial goal. Maybe you're thinking, how much money do I need to bring in so I can pay myself, or so I can hire my first staff member or run the first marketing campaign? And if you ask yourself what that goal actually is, what that financial goal is, then the next question becomes really helpful, which is, how few people do you need to reach to actually get that goal? How few sales do you need in order to be able to pay yourself for the first time? Asking what the fewest number of people you need to reach to hit your goal actually takes the pressure off a little bit, because there's often a sense in impact businesses that somehow we've got to change everyone's mind. Somehow we've got to reach the entire world, make this mainstream, get everybody caring about it. But actually, when you're thinking about how do I get myself to the point of being paid, the only thing that matters is how few people do you need to reach, because there's only so many phone calls a day you can make, and only so much budget you can spend on advertising, only so many doors you can knock on, only so many initiatives you can run, so many sensors you can get pre-produced to run in your waste management business, for example. So defining the smallest group of people you need to reach makes things a hell of a lot easier. And I think I'll skip past some of this stuff today, but to illustrate an example of how this has played out. So this is an example from a company called Kua Coffee, which is a social enterprise running across Sydney and Melbourne, where their coffee makes an incredible impact to communities in Uganda. It's also fair trade. It's also pretty damn good coffee as well. Now, I first spoke to them when they approached me and said, hey, we want to run a Kickstarter campaign. Can you help us run a Kickstarter campaign? I said, why on earth would you want to do something like that? Now, I didn't say it sarcastically. I've run a Kickstarter campaign myself, and it's actually can be a really good way to fund early stage projects. But the question was, why did these guys want to do it? So remember what I was saying up front, people usually start with a medium before they get to the result. So what are you actually trying to achieve here? What is the Kickstarter campaign meant to do for it? Because if we look at what a Kickstarter campaign does, it reaches a pretty diverse audience of people who buy for themselves, ultimately. It's a very direct interaction with the end consumer. Kickstarter is very much a self-expressive, experiential platform where people want to participate in the creation of something new. That's good to know. There are certain businesses for whom that's the perfect audience. But when I sat down and did the numbers with Darcy, one of the founders of Kua Coffee, and we said, what's the goal to actually get all the founding team paid? We realized that of all the different audiences, from individuals buying coffee for themselves, through to cafes, through to offices buying coffee for their businesses, all they needed to do was get 20 businesses, 20 offices with more than 200 people in them to be buying this coffee on a regular basis. That would get them the volumes to actually get their business up and running. So I said, all right, well, is that audience on Kickstarter? If you think about who actually buys coffee for offices, are they hanging out on Kickstarter looking for the latest deal on tea bags and Post-it notes? Probably not. We've just made several steps between someone who's on Kickstarter and the ultimate buyer. So that question of how few people do we need to reach actually had them hanging out in those office towers in Barangaroo in Sydney, where there are more than 20 businesses with 200 staff. And they would stand in the foyers, they would chat to as many people as possible. And in 2 weeks, they're able to get to their goal, whereas a Kickstarter would have taken them months to maybe achieve their goal. So they've now got customers like Canva and KPMG buying from them. And they were able to get there by really narrowing their focus. We all want to be known across the world. We all want to be famous, but can we be famous to fewer people up front? And when we know who those fewer people are, then we can get really specific around what message that audience really needs to hear. Sometimes it's the impact, sometimes it's not. So as a general guide, I'd say communicate your impact when it creates value for the interaction you're having with your customer. So here's the socks. These have the impact right on the front of the packaging. There it is, socks that give water, socks that protect the planet. Now, why does this matter? Well, we basically have two audiences. We've got those who buy socks for themselves and those who buy socks for other people. So we're either being self-expressive, which is what you can see on screen, wear what you believe in, and getting something where people are actually taking a stand. That's a sock pun, isn't it? Taking a stand. But designing the product and the packaging so that they're clearly visible and the symbols of the I keep saying Millennium Development Goals because that's when we started with that framework. Before the Sustainable Development Goals came along, you'll see that the Sustainable Development Goals are literally embroidered on some of the socks in order to start these conversations. Now that helps with the self-expressive side of things. But the vast majority of conscious steps income actually comes from gifts. We're a gifted product. We do a huge amount of volume at Christmas because what do you buy people for Christmas? Socks and undies, right? Well, if you're going to give socks, you might as well give the ones that stand out, that actually have more of a story. And that's what I mean when it creates value for your customers. People are looking to provide gifts that are meaningful. And a story about impact in this case takes a $15 sock and adds another dimension to it that makes it more meaningful than just handing over some colorful socks that might have been at the same price. So there's an additional value created for the customer. I'll give you another, I just wanted to point out here a little specific thing that's often overlooked. Specifics matter. You can see I've highlighted two things here. It's probably too small to read. So on one of these boxes, socks that give water, we said 3 pairs gives 12 years of clean water. On the other box, it says these socks protect rainforests. The difference between those two is that one of them has a number, 12 years of clean water. Now, we found there's actually a really market effect that we sell more of a product when there's a number attached to it, when we're specific. When we say we can plant 10 trees for every pair sold, we sell more of those than when we just say we protect rainforests. Now, that opens up a whole rabbit hole of things that we go down with our charity partners, because some of those charity partners can promise us that when we give them a donation, that gets spent on 10 trees. Some of them can't. And we have this wrestle with them, or this productive arm wrestle saying, is there something specific we can lock in? Because we know we will raise you more money if we can use something specific. Some don't have the accounting systems in place to be able to do that. And unfortunately, we can't. But recommendation for anyone starting a new impact business, when you're communicating impact, be as specific as possible. Because when we say we're planting 10 trees, you can visualize that. It's kind of like a mini forest, isn't it? But when you say we're protecting rainforests, what does that mean? It's harder for the mind to get around. So the more specific you are in communicating your value, the more people can buy into that and really experience it. Another example of communicating your impact when it creates value for your customer is the way Humanitix does it with event organizers. Now, I already said before that Humanitix can't rely on its impact in order to get somebody across the line. They have to get as good a product or better at as good a price or better. But they've ticked that box. The next opportunity for them is to get event organizers thinking about the moment when they stand up at their event and tell their audience how much money they raised because they chose Humanitix. If we think about what goal people really have, supporting good causes is one, but feeling good and feeling proud of their event by announcing an impact is so much more powerful than feeling good about making a difference to the world. So the value that's created here is actually in the expression of it. When we tell event organizers that this is what gets people coming back again, this is what gets you the standing ovation at the end of your event, they're buying in emotionally, knowing that all the rational boxes are ticked as well. So I say communicate your impact when it creates value for your customer. The flip side of it is true as well. Don't communicate your impact if it's not creating value for your customer. I'll go back to Green Collect. Green Collect actually started to create jobs for people who come out of the correction systems. So they're really, really good at creating stable employment and supporting people through that transition. Now, if somebody's got a job because they've been through the correctional system and are now in a new part of the world, does that add value when somebody's buying office furniture for their reception? It's nice, but it's not direct value on the transaction. So it's more important that you talk about all the ways that the furniture is going to be better designed, beautiful, well looked after, quality, delivered without the receptionist having to worry about organizing a courier, all those things first before you get to the impact side of things. So it all comes down to, in the transaction that you're creating, does your impact create value for your customer? That's how you decide what to share and when. So we said there was a flow here, right? We choose what result we're actually trying to achieve, work out the audience, the smallest group of people we need to reach, figure out what message they need to hear, not what we want to say, what they need to hear to get that result. Finally, we get to this choice around, well, where do we put that message? What are all the channels we use that actually make a difference? And I need to say this one loud and clear. It is not your job to entertain people on a daily basis. You do not have to be on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. You do not have to do that. People will tell you it's free. It's not free, because you have to spend time creating all that content and materials for social media. And if you expect to get paid, even now or in the future, well, that time has a value on it. You're spending money every time you're investing in social media. So I like to give people permission to not use social media. If you ever stumble across Smarter Drafters' Facebook page, you'll see a banner that says, hey, we're really good at helping lawyers, but we don't care about social media. Come and visit our website instead. We've claimed it so that hackers and spoofers can't come along and claim it, but then intentionally put zero effort into it, because it's not how lawyers buy software for their law firms through Facebook. So we gave ourselves permission to just let it go, and you might need that permission too. But if you are going to do something, just remember that any channel that you create, the best marketing is always something that offers value. The best marketing for Humanitix was running guides for how to run digital events in March of last year, when all of a sudden, hundreds and thousands of event organizers were facing either canceling their event or switching to digital. We turned around in a couple of days this incredibly detailed guide on how to do that so that they didn't have to cancel their events. The most effective marketing we ran for the legal software was running a survey and finding out what lawyers actually charge for their services. Really valuable information that nobody had had before. And their desire to find out what others are charging opened up so many sales conversations that got us in the door. And one of the most effective marketing campaigns for Conscious Step was the Give a Gift, Get a Gift campaign. Hey, you're giving a gift, get one for yourself as well. It's a free pair that comes when you order above a certain value. Now, if you think back to our result audience message medium, this campaign right here came from a result of trying to increase the amounts that people spend when they're on our website. The average was about $40 per transaction. We thought, well, if we can get that above $50, that's actually going to grow the business by 20%. So we said, hey, spend more than $50. It says 60, doesn't it? Spend more than $60 and you'll get a free pair as well. So it was that process of working through. But what all of these have in common is that none of them are an ad. None of them are, hey, we're doing good things. they all produce something of value that make our customers' lives better. And that's been the thing that made our impact more meaningful and got our more transactions, got more sales across the line. So that's it in a nutshell. If there's only one thing you remember from today, it's this result, audience, message, medium as a flow. Whenever you hear someone starting in the other direction, say, hey, I've got a really good idea. Let's make a YouTube video, stand up for them and take them through this process. Say, well, what are we actually trying to achieve? Who's the fewest we need to reach? What message do they need to hear? What's the best channel to put that on? If you put the letters together, it says RAM. So that might help you remember it. RAM like the sheep, RAM like the car, RAM like the computer chips, RAM like a battering ram. There's one thing you take away from today, I'd be delighted if it is simply that. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect with me there. You might remember from our very first session, I said there are a couple of things we need to hear as quickly as possible in the pitch, which is who are you really helping? What problem are you solving for them? How are you solving and how are you charging? They're the 4 things that need to come out straight away. And it took a little while to get to, well, who's actually going to buy this? I've got some questions for you, I guess, which is more from a strategy perspective. If phase 1 was all about councils, and in that phase, you're going to go out, you're going to spend a ton of effort meeting all the councils, meeting the right people, networking through them, going through 2-year budget processes to get them to buy. And then it looked like phase 2 was going into a marketplace, which is ignoring the councils and then going for an entirely new audience and basically starting a new business on top of that. So what I'd encourage you to do is say, all right, well, if we're going to put all this effort into building connections with councils, is phase 2 actually something else that councils can buy from you, where it's, hey, we've got these relationships, now they can buy something else, now they can buy something else, rather than launching into another business with another audience, which is, yeah, basically like starting from scratch, even with everything that's going on. So have a think about that and see whether you might be able to make your life easier by focusing on a smaller audience segment. And good luck.
I always find that, I'm not sure if you have like a personal story or something like a little bit emotional that is the reason why you started this business, but if you do, I always find that pulls people in straight away when there's something a little bit emotional. And I come from a branding background, so I will always, that's I'm probably biased towards that, but I do find that pitches that have a bit of a story that is emotional and personal will be remembered. And so that's the first thing. I'm not sure if you have something like that, but if you do, that would be fantastic. And the second thing, again, this is from a branding perspective, a lot of slides that people use when they pitch are really ugly. Yours are not really ugly, but they also don't stand out. So yours are definitely not ugly. Most are ugly. So I just feel like, when someone comes along with a pitch and slides that are just different, that are neat, that this has been thought through, also visually. Again, for probably 70% of the people listening who are visual, they will notice that because it will stand out. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, I don't think you shared any projections in terms of the market share that you're going after or how you're going to monetize and how much. Did you share that information? I don't remember that you did.
If we had our time again and we listened to your pitch where it started with your personal story, one, like you're dedicating an enormous amount of time that you don't have to this, so you really mean it. So that's got my attention. 2, you're a full-time working mum who has got your personal waste management so dialed down, it's kind of the envy of the world. And you come from this technology background, so now you're looking to scale that. That little narrative provides some stepping stones for me to understand why you might have something unique that others don't, which really goes to my only other point, that particularly in impact, when you're trying to tackle massive problems, when you're articulating a pitch that speaks to massive problems, unless you can very quickly come down into your secret sauce, your unique value proposition, like what makes you better than other people, and then dial into the very, very specific problem that you're trying to fix in the short term, it's just too unbelievable and blows people's minds. So, waste management in Australia, in councils, but even then, which is the time, what's your beachhead market in essence? What's your widget going to do to solve a small part of the problem very quickly so that councils jump on board and don't have to go through their 2-year process?
In your case, The question I'll ask is who cares? And I mean that very specifically, like who's the audience that's going to care about this enough that they're willing to hand over money to make it happen? So there's an assumption here there's somebody in a council for whom this matters because it's their job, it's their KPIs, they're in charge of the budget. So we've got to find that person, number one. And so the question then is, what's the minimum we need to put in front of that person to get them to buy from you? And the good news is, it's actually not very much at all. It's probably just a PowerPoint deck. It doesn't need to be a fully operational system because at this point of your business, what you're trying to do is work out, if you go and build this and get the sensors set up and build the infrastructure and build the marketplace, will this person buy it? Now, all you need to do to find that out is put a PowerPoint in front of them. If I was in your position, before I go and invest in building the sensors and that kind of thing, you can go and have these conversations with a PowerPoint deck and say, look, here's what I'm thinking. What would need to be true for you to buy this? That's the question. What would need to be true for you to buy this? And they will tell you either something needs to change on their end, like they need budget approvals, they need certain systems to change, or they'll tell you your product needs to change. It needs to measure these things. It needs to work in this way. It needs to.
So I think another way to think about this problem, minimal viable product, is just to spin it back around to the customer. And what's the minimal viable experience? Like, what's the experience that you're trying to give the customer? Firstly, I'm not quite clear who your customer is. Is it council or is it the homeowner? Whose core problem are you trying to solve? So that could be my problem. But what's the minimum experience you're trying to offer to them, and whatever that is may well dictate the sort of the product build. Again, you know, your problem is so massive, and what you're trying to do with it from a marketplace is so massive yet again. Like, how do you find a way to go an inch wide and a mile deep first, prove that, and then go again? So it's not really an answer. It's sort of another question back to you. But, you know, if you can think about this from the customer experience perspective, and then work out how you can sort of just take one little part of the problem and go deep, that's going to be the best way to work out what the product looks like, work out what team you need to build around that, and therefore how much money you need to make it happen. And then that's a more believable story to investors, because you're always at risk of being perceived to be trying to boil the ocean. And that's a bit of a no-no. It's a no-no that I've fallen into the trap of a lot.
Maybe do you have the two audiences, the household person and then the person within the council? And then do you need to go through Adam's model with result audience first for both of them? Because one without the other probably won't work. So I feel like, and this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that business owners make, is they just sort of have the one bucket of audience and everyone is in the same bucket, but there are very different needs and very different messages that these audiences will need. So you probably will need to create two different buckets and then go through Adam's system that he took us through tonight.
Or where you're attaching your solution to another product that is trying to signal the intent to, you know, be more sustainable. So for example, like doing an affinity deal with a company that sells garbage bags, where, you know, your solution gets offered to their customers, you know, at a discount or something like that. Like, ultimately you're looking for whoever's prepared to pay. And I'm not sure whether that's a direct payer or like a third party, but I think, like, I'd be reluctant to move too much further down your growth path, because you're a very, very busy person, before working out who's going to pay for the widget that you can develop in the short term. I think that's what I'd be losing sleep over if I was you.
Yeah, look, I think that the big thing is that it's not about what we want to say, it's about what our audience needs to hear. And that was a lesson I learned really the hard way with my first business, which was all about sustainable manufacturing. But I was talking to people who needed to hear a very different message from what I was going out with. And I was always told, in, you know, back when I went to entrepreneurial events in the 2000s, people were saying, it's all about passion. You just got to believe in what you do more than anybody else does. But if nobody else believes in it, then you're not going to get a sale. So it's all about empathy and understanding, what does your audience need to hear.
Don't compromise. You know, sometimes there are easier ways to do something, but maybe they're not better ways. And it's just one example would be, you know, for one of our labels, Ocean Lovers, especially initially, there were way easier ways to make these suits and use fabrics that are not sustainable or less sustainable, or, you know, kind of sustainable. So, and you know, it's very tempting to go down that path because it's cheaper and it's quicker and it's easier. But I think if we take a pledge to whatever we do, like, for example, pledge to the ocean, we have to make sure that we're sticking to it and that the whole supply chain is also in order. Otherwise, we're hypocritical, and eventually that will, you know, bite us in the butt long term, if, you know, if you're a massive company suddenly. And also, I think you won't lose sleep, you know, and want you to lose sleep over that other question. But if you are sticking to your commitment and you don't compromise, you won't lose sleep, at least on that side.
Yeah, and mine is don't try to boil the ocean. You know, when Amazon was able to sell some books online, really simple, really very linear process, and that enabled them to kind of do everything from sending people into space to running most of the businesses' internets in the world to, you know, everything else in between. But they started just trying to ship books from a buyer to a seller.
Thank you all so much for your incredible mentorship, advice, and these masterclasses on how to measure, manage, and importantly, communicate impact. I think the overwhelming message here is that you need to be solving a customer problem first and foremost. Solving the most pressing challenges that our world face are so important, because it does attract customers, but you have to communicate it with value. It does attract more investment, but you have to be able to articulate that impact correctly, because impact washing is a thing, and we're in an era of radical visibility, and saying something and not really following through with it is not going to fly anymore. Having those aspirational targets of being the most sustainable brand in the world, but your supply chain isn't up to scratch, doesn't fly. So thank you so much for your time. I've learned so much and I'm so appreciative of it. So thank you so much for your time. We are on a mission to create the next gen of sustainable entrepreneurs.